Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by HitUni.com. If you haven't been a long-time listener and had the upsides of high-intensity training drilled into your brain, HIT has dramatically reduced my exercise volume to sub 30 minutes per week while helping me build more muscle and reduce my body fat to 10%, which in turn has enabled me to do more with my time, like play sports that I love, build businesses, and play more Call of Duty. Who wouldn't want that? So what has this got to do with HitUni? HitUni.com are providers of amazing online courses that teach you all about high-intensity training. There's a course for newbies that will show you how to optimize your workouts to build more muscle, burn more fat, and improve overall health. And the bulk of the courses are designed to qualify you to become a high-intensity training personal trainer and equip you with all the knowledge and business skills you need to build a successful fitness business. HitUni comes highly recommended by Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, Drew Bay, and Medex Precision Fitness owner Blair Wilson. It was founded by author and one of the UK's leading personal trainers, Simon Shawcross, who's been training people for 15 years and has supervised over 15,000 workouts. With help from contributors like Jimmy Moore, Dr. James Steele, and Edward Harrison, and inspiration from Arthur Jones, Dr. Ellington Darden, Ken Hutchins, Mike Mensa, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's an online support and discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. I personally used HitUni to build my own stunning physique, just kidding, but I have purchased a course to improve my understanding of HIT and improve my own results. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into these bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement as you tick off each one. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, choose your course, and enter the coupon code CW10. Thank you for your support. Hey guys, this is Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. This is the home of health, business and lifestyle optimization, where I interview experts to challenge popular opinion, learn about their exercise regimens, time management techniques, diets, business attributes and daily routines that you can apply for a more balanced, productive and happy life. Guests include high-intensity training pioneers like Dr. Doug McGuff and Drew Bay, health and fitness giants like Mark Sisson and Ben Greenfield, successful entrepreneurs, digital nomads, and many more. Today's guest is Tim Ryan. Generally, the way I pick guests for this show is either I selfishly really want to interview someone that I'm interested in, regardless of their status, be it a celebrity or someone who could be quite unknown, or if enough of you mention the same person over and over to me, and Tim was the latter. He was one of those guys that a number of you were interested in having on the show. So Tim is the founder of Precision Fitness, a gym that trains people based on high-intensity training, a form of exercise made popular in the 80s by Arthur Jones. Tim has been in the industry for 40 years and has worked closely with the aforementioned Jones and other legends in the high-intensity training community. Tim's a popular figure in the high-intensity training world and has a lot to say about the subject of what it means to train effectively to achieve specific goals. This episode is perfect for you if you're interested in learning more about high-intensity training in general, are already experienced on the subject and want to refine your workout, or if you're a business owner in the high-intensity training space and want to learn more about how you can motivate people to exercise. Topics include Tim's exercise background, his exposure to Dr. Ellington Darden, Arthur Jones, Ken Hutchins, and others in the community over the years, his views on why many people don't take up high-intensity training, how to train kids, tips on neck training using manual resistance, thoughts on workout frequency, and the other benefits you might not have actually considered in terms of increasing workout frequency. Training to failure, inroading, training using multiple sets. And we get into some depth on Tim's beginner protocol and progression for someone looking for optimal muscle growth, including the dietary side of that as well. And we get into much more. All the show notes and links will be in the usual place on corpwarrior.com. Just search Tim Ryan and this will pop straight up. And without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Tim Ryan. Cheers. Okay, so first question. So I read through your bio, obviously, and your career is quite obviously, or at least it appears to be, almost completely dedicated to exercise. Whether you obviously graduated with a degree in exercise, and then went to work for various, fitness centers, and Nautilus being one of those, and then I guess branching out in your own business further down the line. Yeah. I'd just be really interested in your story, if you could elaborate on that in terms of how you became interested in exercise and how that then evolved into having a really long and what looks like a pretty successful career in it too.
Okay. Yeah. Well, where it all started for me is when I was in high school, say around 15 years old, and I was involved in baseball as a sport, and the coach had come to me and suggested that I needed to build up some strength and, get a little more strength and power and stuff like that for the game. And he encouraged me to start taking up weightlifting and so forth to do that. So, I began to engage in a program, and obviously at the time didn't know that much about it or anything, but based on the information that was available, I started doing the traditional 3 sets of 10 type of program and doing, the variety of different lifts. And originally I just started out working out in my basement of my home with some free weights, a barbell set and things like that. And eventually started working out on equipment at the school and so forth. And, that continued for a couple of years and, went through high school and finished out sort of my baseball career with that. But by that point I was completely engaged and hooked on the sort of the fitness lifestyle and working out and continuing to do those things. So I continued to work out and joined a gym at this point and started working out on a full variety of equipment. And at the time, I would say this was back in, I graduated high school in 1980, so just after that, when I joined the gym, they had a lot of Nautilus equipment in the gym, and at the time that Nautilus was really in its heyday and very popular and was revolutionizing sort of the fitness industry with their equipment. And the equipment was obviously very, mysterious, all the big apparatus and the chains and pulleys and, all that kind of stuff. It was always intriguing and I used it, but I didn't know anything really about the background of the equipment or the philosophy behind it or how it was advised that it should be used and so forth. I just used it. And but a couple of years later, I just had an interest in getting a job at a fitness center. At that point, I did not have any, education in it other than my practical experience. But I decided I would go to the local gym and apply to be a part-time fitness instructor, see if I could get a job there. And that facility happened to be a Nautilus facility. And when I say Nautilus, these facilities were not owned by the Nautilus Equipment Company. They were just privately owned facilities that sort of advertised the fact that they featured Nautilus equipment.
Right.
So they called themselves, Nautilus Fitness or something like that. And I think Nautilus Equipment Company had a agreement that if you had a minimum number of Nautilus machines that you had purchased and have in your facility, they allowed you to use the Nautilus name as part of your business, name.
Okay.
So at any rate, I walked into this Nautilus Fitness Center in my town and tried to get a job there, and I got hired, and it was just a part-time basis, but I got hired, and then that started the process of the owner of that facility educating me on the Nautilus philosophy, the Nautilus method, the Nautilus equipment. And he gave me the books by Ellington Darden, the Nautilus bodybuilding book and the Nautilus book and a lot of the others. And he gave me all the various articles and, obviously information about Arthur Jones, the inventor of Nautilus. And, I started reading these materials and I was completely blown away. Just, oh my gosh, I've never heard this stuff before. This just sounds crazy.
Did this include the bulletins from?
The bulletins and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm reading this and realize at the time, everybody's usually training for a couple hours at a time and doing multiple sets and split routines and working out 5 days a week. So here's this Nautilus information, and at the time it's saying, work out 3 days a week for 30 minutes and do just one set of each exercise, and including the information of moving very quickly through the exercises, keeping your heart rate elevated and attempting to get cardiovascular conditioning along with the strength and that whole process. So that was just a radical concept for me reading all this. And I also became completely attracted to just the Arthur Jones phenomenon and the equipment and the science in the background of the equipment and where that came from and how it was designed. And I just completely got enthralled in this. So as I began working in the center, I completely switched over to the high-intensity Nautilus type of training system and began to just devour everything I could on reading and materials, and including going down to Florida to the Nautilus headquarters and participating in Nautilus seminars that they were having, and meeting Arthur Jones and meeting other people that had worked for Nautilus, Ken Hutchins and Jim Flanagan and people like that. And at one point I decided that I want to make a career out of fitness. And at the time, my hope was I would get a job at Nautilus, because I was so, at this point, so into Nautilus that I wanted to work for them. And, I had contacted them and inquired about the possibility of that. And they had kind of made it known, or at least the person I talked to made it known that it's probably not going to happen if you don't have any kind of a degree or education or background in exercise.
How old were you at this point?
I was... 21.
Okay.
Probably 22 by the time I contacted Nautilus to inquire like this. Mm-hmm. So about 22 years old, and anyway, that contact kind of made me see that if I wanted a career in exercise and fitness, I had to pursue a college degree in the field. So what I did is I enrolled in college in a exercise science, exercise physiology type program. And I continued to work at that Nautilus Fitness Center while I went to school. Okay, so, the next 4 years of getting my degree and continuing to work at the Nautilus Fitness Center. And then after obviously completing my degree, then that started moving me in the next direction onto other, facilities and other opportunities to expand my career.
How was when you did your degree, what was your view on the curriculum? Because obviously, I'm sure I'm assuming a lot of stuff you learned from Arthur Jones and the Nautilus movement contradicted probably a lot of what you were taught in education. Is that true?
Oh yeah, I mean it was completely contradictory, and the first thing I'll say about that is that most of the curriculum, in terms of the actual exercise part of it, most of the curriculum was really biased and focused on the cardiovascular aspects. I didn't really have a whole lot of classes or even sections in the exercise physiology coursework that really dwelled much on strength training at the time. They were just totally obsessed with the heart and aerobic cardiovascular type exercise. And then, of course, any mentioned or thoughts relative to strength training, it was the typical conventional, 3 sets of 10, all these different body parts, muscle groups, long duration workouts, high volume training is what they discussed. And, I've said frequently that as far as my education and my degree, the only parts of it that I even really gained any value from or even still use today are more the background sciences. So, the biology that I had to take and the chemistry and the anatomy and physiology coursework and sort of learning all of that physiological background information, still serves me today. But as far as the specific application or whether I learned anything about how to properly design and administer exercise programs, I would say all of it that they were teaching at the time is contradictory to, everything that I do now and everything that I believe now. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were on one then, and I just kind of interrupted you because you were sort of. I think you got to the point where you're like, okay, they said you need to go and do a degree. You went and got a degree, and then what happened after that in your career?
Well, when I finished my degree, that Nautilus Fitness Center that I was working in, it was a relatively small fitness center. It was privately owned, and there was nowhere for me to go higher other than kind of I was sort of like an assistant manager of the facility, and the owner himself was the manager. So there was not really anything at that point that they could offer me sort of career-wise as a full-time job that would, be commensurate with now having a degree and needing to establish myself in a career and so forth. So at the time in the same town, the local hospital had just completed building a large, like 65,000 square foot medically based multi-purpose athletic center type of thing, where it was just this huge facility that had not only all the exercise, but all the recreational athletic type facilities and pools and medical based programs and things that they did in conjunction with the hospital and so forth. So I went there and got hired as a staff exercise physiologist at first, and worked in that position for about a year, and then I became the fitness director of that, which meant that I completely oversaw the entire fitness department, all of the exercise programs, all of the sport and recreation type programs that they offered, including the personal training program and all of the exercise instructors and hiring and training the exercise instructors. So I worked in that position as the director for a couple of years before eventually leaving there to start my own business.
Okay, so tell me, when you were in that role that you just mentioned, were you ever struck with the challenge of like, okay, so at that point, firstly, I'm assuming that you had some of the knowledge you have now in terms of like strength training is important and high volume strength training is largely arbitrary. So let's say you're equipped with some of that knowledge. Were you forced to teach certain exercise, training principles to staff that actually maybe you didn't believe in, or was there ever a challenge like that, or did you not? Could you do it your own way, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, there were challenges, but one of the things where I was fortunate is that number one, the fitness director prior to me that I worked under for the first year, he happened to be friends with Wayne Westcott.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you've probably heard of him.
Sure.
And Wayne Westcott is obviously a Nautilus and high intensity type of advocate. So that fitness director was, having known Wayne, he was obviously open to Wayne's teaching and Wayne's influence and concepts. So when I came in and started trying to, advocate the Nautilus high intensity stuff, he was relatively open to it, and he let me do it. When I became the fitness director, obviously I had much more influence now, and the people above me in the organization, say the general manager of the entire facility, those people were of the persuasion, first off, they didn't really care about exercise per se. I mean, they're more into the business side of running the facility and the dollars and cents and getting members in the door and stuff like that. So they gave me pretty good latitude in terms of teach the exercise program that I wanted. So I didn't get a lot of resistance from them, but, certainly from time to time with the staff, obviously some of the staff that were there and at the time and came on during the time I was there, they're coming in with different backgrounds, and they're coming in from kind of university degrees where they were taught all the conventional stuff. So when I would try to teach them our concept and the principles of the Nautilus high intensity, there would certainly be some resistance from them because they didn't believe in it, kind of a thing. So there was that, but I didn't get that much resistance from the ownership or the management of the facility because, like I say, they didn't care. They just wanted, this facility to be successful and people in the door and that kind of stuff.
How did you get around? So when you did have people join that were resistant to your principles and teachings, like how did you get around that? How did you convince them? Because I still think the dogma around like conventional exercise, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like in the US, but in the UK it's pretty strong, and it can be very difficult to make someone understand what I would consider proper exercise with real benefits. Even if you're very articulate and you can talk through the science, it's just so ingrained in people. So how did you get around some of that? If you did that is.
Yeah, well, in terms of even if we back up a little bit back to when I worked at that Nautilus Fitness Center, in terms of everything that we taught sort of institutionally or systemically within the facility, we were teaching the Nautilus high intensity principles. But as you'd have people and members come in the door, some people would be just general average folk that would come in and they do whatever you tell them, and if you teach them this is how you do it, this is how you do it, and they just run through the program and they do it without any resistance. But of course in the mix are people coming in that are more maybe fitness enthusiasts and have a background in having exercised a lot before, and people that were more into maybe sports and bodybuilding and stuff, and there would ensue all sorts of debates and arguments and stuff, and all sorts of resistance to them not believing what we were trying to teach them and arguing about the merits of it. At the next facility, the medically based facility, one of the things that we did with all new members as they came in is that they had to go through a new member orientation into the exercise program. And this was I had created a slideshow presentation and a lecture format. And much of it was based on Wayne Westcott's material. And in fact, I think I even got like many of the slides from Wayne Westcott, some of his slides that he uses in his presentation. So I created this lecture slideshow, and all the new members would go through it, and we'd present all this information and some of the research behind it and the concepts behind the program, and we'd take them all through that. And that was pretty successful at helping people see that this was, more scientifically based and more well thought out and had some research behind it and had some good logic behind it. So again, most of the rank and file members pretty well just accepted it and understood what we were teaching them. But still, we would have the people that just didn't buy into it. And at that facility too, there was a separate area from the Nautilus machines. There was a separate area of all the free weights and the barbells and so forth. And of course, you'd have the so-called meatheads, in the back room where they would be pumping iron, and they would kind of scoff at the people using the Nautilus machines. And
you still get that here,
right.
There's a gym in Putney called Physical Culture. Putney's in London, East London, South London, and it's got like a true spit and sawdust style, Olympic weightlifting type area with like lots of big guys working out in there, and then you've got like this little room off to the side which has got a lot of really good Med-X equipment, and it's just. I wouldn't say they scoffed at it, but you get some funny looks in there. I've not worked out there very, very often, but I'm not saying it's a great place to work out. It's just funny how you got the two different communities, so to speak. And where I was working out, which is a place called Keiser Training, which you might be familiar with the name,
right?
Is pure. It's just kitted out with Med-X, and they just teach the high intensity training way, so to speak. There's none of that. There's not that divide, so it's quite interesting. But sorry, as you were.
Yeah. So at any rate, I've had more than my fair share of debates and arguments back and forth, and trying to convince people that what I was trying to teach them was the most efficient and effective way of training and so forth. But one of the things that you learn is that if you're dealing with bodybuilders, let's say, you're never going to convince them usually, because they just they don't want to train the way we're recommending, because to them, their fitness program, their bodybuilding, their weightlifting program, it's an entire lifestyle to them. Okay, so the concept that you're going to come in and work out once or twice a week for 15 to 30 minutes and go full bore, high intensity to failure on each exercise, and just train that way, and then that's it, you're done, you're out of the gym for the next week or next 5 days or whatever your thing is. They're not even attracted to that, because they want to be in the gym. They want to go to the gym every day and spend 2 hours and hang around, and they have the camaraderie with the guys, and they pump off their few sets, and then they stand around and talk and socialize with the people there, and primp in front of the mirror, and so forth. And so for a lot of that, even if you could intellectually prove it to them, emotionally they don't want it to be true, because they want to spend 10, 12 hours a week working out, and they want to hang around the gym and socialize, and they don't want to be so winded between sets that they can't talk, and things like that.
Interesting.
And part of what would happen too is I would numerous times take some of these bodybuilders through a Nautilus type high intensity workout, and the thing that I've always just been stunned by is how wimpy these guys are, for lack of a better term, because they would come and, okay, you're trying to get them to train to muscle failure, and number one, their form would just be horrendous. You just can't get them to use good form, because they're so used to being sloppy. But they would be, nowhere near true muscle failure, and they'd be ready to just bail on the exercise and drop the weight, and they would just be, they don't know what it's like to push that hard and to push that deeply into fatigue to a true, muscle failure. So they would be giving up and setting the weight down and just bailing on the exercise long before they were really that close. And I would always be just shocked at, really how far away from failure they really are, yet how convinced they are that they're being just crushed, And you take them through a workout where they would go through 8 or 10 exercises to kind of quasi, their version of failure, but nowhere near my version of failure. And they would just act like so devastated and be, laying out on the floor. And I'd be sitting here thinking, my gosh, they've hardly done anything, and they're used to doing, 5 sets of every exercise and 5 different types of exercises for each muscle group. And now I just had them do 1 set of leg press, and they're more devastated than they are from, 15 sets of their training. And it would always also leave me scratching my head, like, how in the world are these people, and many of these people would be far more muscular than me and have much better physiques than I did. And I'm thinking, how in the world do they get this physique training the way they do? Because they clearly don't know what hard work is. They've clearly never worked to failure or even very deeply fatigued themselves. Yet, if you look at them, you'd think otherwise.
And I suppose now you would justify that because it's basically just genetics, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's first and foremost. It's the genetic influence and just the body type that they've inherited. I guess you can't deny the fact that their training had to influence their attainment of results. But, what you've got is that somewhere in the mix of everything they do, whether we say that it's logical or efficient or safe or whatever, somewhere in the context of everything they do, they are doing something to cause a stimulus to their muscles. Okay. Now, sure, do their bodies respond more easily to a stimulus than other people's? Yes. And do they already have an existing body type that makes it conducive to development of muscles and symmetry and shape of their body to make them have that athletic look? Certainly, but you can't deny that the training had to have in some way influenced it. We just would say that you could have got the same result training with much less exercise and training with the system that, obviously that we would recommend. So I wouldn't necessarily promise that I could give them a different result. I would promise that I could give them the same result with much less exercise and much less time spent in the gym and do it safer.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. It goes back to your previous point about a lot of the reason why those types of people enjoy the high volume approach, high frequency, high volume, is because of the emotional attachment to the whole experience.
Yeah,
it's completely different to single set to failure once or twice a week, where it's just about getting the job done. And I'd not thought about it in that way before, but I think it's difficult to sell efficiency to someone who deems it as part of their quality of life, part of their lifestyle, isn't it?
Yeah, and you get the same thing with people that are, let's say, obsessed with running and doing marathons and things of that nature. And it reminds me of something that Kenneth Cooper, he's the medical doctor that coined the term aerobics back in 1968. He was a big runner, and he promoted running programs in the late 1960s and throughout the 70s and 80s and stuff. And so he was a big running guru, big into running, completely obsessed with aerobic exercise and cardiovascular health. And he wrote, various books about it. And he was the one that most popularized and got this sort of the running craze going in the United States at the time. But in recent years, he's come to understand how little exercise is really needed to produce the physiological effects. And I'm just making, just some generalized numbers. I mean, generally in his early books, he would recommend training 6 or 7 days a week and running 10 miles a day and, accumulating 60, 70 miles a week, and that type of thing. And in recent years, he's come to the realization that that's far more training than anybody needs, and that there's some negative repercussions from that type of volume of training and so forth. And he once made the comment, I think something to the effect that anybody who's running more than 3 times a week for, let's say 15 miles a week or something to that effect, is doing so for reasons other than physiological reasons. And what he was kind of indicating is that you're doing it for mental sort of needs that you think you might have that are being satisfied by running, but running more than that is not required physiologically to gain any physiological benefit. So if you're training more than that, you're doing so for mental, emotional needs being met or something. So I would apply that same thing to what I said about the bodybuilders, is that they apparently have some sort of emotional or mental needs or desires that are being met by spending hours and hours in the gym and hanging around with all these people. And so they're training that much to meet those needs. So even if you convince them that physiologically they don't need to train like that, they would still do it anyway for those emotional, mental needs.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did Kenneth Cooper, did he say anything about the importance of strength training towards, once he kind of revised his position on running? Did he also say anything about the benefits of strength training or anything like that?
Yeah, and it was kind of funny because you read his older books and he completely mocked and ridiculed the concept of strength training. Mm-hmm. He literally, there's concepts in his books and quotes from his books where he literally said that there's no reason to strength train other than for vanity. So, that was in his earlier books, but now, more up to the present, he did completely change his tune, and now he highly recommends strength training, although he still places the aerobic training of higher importance than the strength training. So he now sort of acquiesces and acknowledges the need for strength training, particularly to fight back the aging process and the loss of muscle and that type of thing. But I would say he still doesn't quite get it, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So even though he now will recommend it, he still doesn't know how to do it properly, and he still doesn't fully understand the value of it. And the fact, like we would say, is that strength training is of primary importance. It's not secondary to the aerobic training. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, just want to ask you some questions regarding exercises specifically. So as I alluded to earlier, sadly, Keezer closed down in London. Keezer's a big global gym chain, but to people living in London who understand the benefits of the type of resistance training we're talking about, Keezer was a really, really popular place to go. In fact, a couple of people listeners of this podcast trained there as well, and I trained there for a few years, and they've got loads of MedX, or had loads of MedX machines. Yeah. So now I'm training at home at the moment, but it's kind of an interesting challenge for me because rather than go and find another gym similar to Keezer, which there are some options, I figured, kind of as a challenge, try and develop my home workout game, right? Like, how can I get great results by, leveraging a sort of minimalist environment, right? So, what I would love to hear from you is, firstly, do you train people from home? Like, do you do I don't know if you do like telephone consultations or stuff like that for people that want to work out at home? And with that in mind, what do you normally recommend for people who have maybe, let's say, a chin-up bar and that's it, and maybe some dumbbells? Like, what kind of workout protocol would you suggest in the first instance in that type of environment?
Yeah, well, first off, in terms of professionally speaking, my business or anything that I do on a regular basis, I don't train anybody at home, and I don't really get involved in sort of at-home consultations, other than the fact that I do get calls from people from around the country from time to time that want to call and chat me up and ask some questions and that kind of stuff. And for the most part, it's just something that I do as a courtesy, and I'll spend a little time with people and answer their questions, or they'll send me emails and things like that. So I'll get involved in a bit with that, but not really professionally or as part of my business. But in terms of, let's say, somebody that is training in that type of an environment at home, obviously the equipment you use is important, and what you have access to is important. And, from a standpoint of being able to really adequately train and condition your body, you can certainly do that very well with a few core basic exercises. If you're dealing with, let's say, barbells, squats and deadlifts and chin-ups and dips and bench presses, shoulder presses, those big compound exercises and things. Sure, you can certainly build a great body doing those kind of exercises, and they are very effective. Where you start to run into trouble, though, is in some of the muscle groups that can't be adequately addressed with those big general sort of compound movements, and one of the things with any type of free weight, it's it's hard to get at, let's say, hamstring muscles in the back of your thighs. People say, well, you do get your hamstrings activated doing, say, deadlifts. All right. Okay. But what you're doing, that you're not addressing at all the knee flexion aspect of the hamstrings. You're involving the aspect that participates in hip extension. Okay. So yes, if you put some sort of electromyograph on your muscles, it may register activity in the hamstrings, but deadlifts are not going to do anything to improve your knee flexion functional ability, and not really be able to train the hamstrings through a very adequate range of motion. Okay. Get into things such as even with your upper back muscles. Certainly chin-ups, pull-ups type of thing can really work your back muscles, but to do any type of, let's say, a row, like a compound row type exercise, or any type of more specifically isolated back exercises that activate the rhomboids and trapezius and those type of muscle groups, you need to be doing some type of a rowing back type of motion. And to do that with a free weight, you can do bent over rows with a dumbbell or something like that. But one aspect of that is that the resistance curve of that exercise is completely backwards from what those muscles require. Doing a bent over dumbbell row, you're getting a mismatch between the muscle's strength profile and what the profile of the exercise is providing. So you can't get a real good, adequate workout without probably having to do a lot of multiple sets to get enough stimulation there. Of course, things with your neck or your lower back and things like that, there's going to be muscle groups that maybe can't get adequately addressed, even though you're getting maybe the big major things addressed with that. So, but I have a lot of appreciation recently for focusing on the big kind of core exercises. I find myself doing a lot fewer isolation type exercises and focusing a lot more on compound exercises. But I do certainly the isolation type exercises, the rotary movements that we would say, I'm regularly training my neck. I'm regularly training my hamstrings with leg curl type exercises, and I'm training inner and outer thigh adductor muscles and things like that with the rotary movements. But my chest, my shoulders, my upper back, my thighs and legs and stuff, I'm finding myself using a lot more of the compound movements to do those.
Okay. So what about if you were doing like a wall sit, maybe followed by some super slow bodyweight squats or something like that? Would that not activate the hamstring?
Well, like I said, it's going to activate the hamstring, and you're going to get tension in the hamstring, and you're going to get some stimulation, but I would not believe that you're going to really be improving the primary function of the hamstring, which is knee flexion. You're getting more of a peripheral aspect of what the hamstring does. So, and I've seen sort of practical experience from this is that I've seen people that have come to me, particularly like with sort of the Body by Science routine, where they talk about the big five, and you do your leg presses and chest press and row and pull down kind of a thing. So generally on the big five, the only lower body exercise you're doing is the leg press. Okay, I've had people that visit me from various areas who are really into that type of a program, and all they ever do is leg presses. And I bring them in my facility and I put them on the leg curl exercise, and they literally are as weak as a kitten on that exercise. They can hardly even perform the exercise properly. They've got a very poor range of motion, and their hamstrings go into a spasm almost immediately when they try to do the leg curling exercise. So I've seen on more than one occasion people that never use that leg curl exercise where their hamstrings are just really kind of dysfunctional and very weak. So that's an area that my opinion is that you need to address and be doing some sort of that isolated motion around knee flexion.
Is not part of that, like, initial kind of being weak at that movement, is that just because they haven't done that specific exercise, and it's not necessarily because their hamstrings are really weak, but just because they've not done that specific, because obviously, as you know, the muscle is so plastic, it's so adaptable, and because they haven't done that before or for a long time, that's why they're struggling so much? Or do you think that actually there should be more crossover? It should be that they're so weak in that, they should be able to do, they should be able to perform at a certain level regardless?
Yeah, I think there's some of both. There's certainly that sort of specificity that if, let's say somebody was training in a different facility and using leg curl machines all the time and training their hamstrings in a direct way like that, and let's say using some other brand or type of leg curling exercise that I don't have, they would come into my facility and they would not be, let's say, as functionally capable on my leg curl machine as they could be, because they don't have specific experience with my leg curl machine, and they have not sort of adapted and sort of got that skill acquisition or that type of a thing on there. But in those type of people that are training hamstrings regularly in other ways, I may see that they're not completely stellar at performing my leg curl, but they're at least fairly competent with it and they have fairly good strength. But the people that don't do any type of regular hamstring training other than what's indirectly accessed through the leg press, they come in and they're literally men who are weaker than most of my women clients, and they go into that full knee flexion range of motion and their hamstrings spasm and cramp up, and they have to stop the exercise and get out of the machine and rub their hamstrings until the spasm settles down. I mean, those are the kind of things that I've seen with people that don't train hamstrings at all. So that more tells me that it's beyond just the lack of specific experience with my machine, that there's something else going on there.
Okay. You talked earlier about how it's hard to get to those muscle groups with, like a home workout with limited equipment. How would you do it? Like, I appreciate you might not have the same benefits of having your own leg curl machine and your own lower back machine or something like that. But what's the second best option, assuming you've got very limited equipment at home in terms of working the hamstrings and lower back? Because that's a concern of mine.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, and I've got kind of a similar situation to what you're describing at home, because I've got two teenage sons who I'm trying to get, keep involved in an exercise program. And once a week, if we're lucky, I can get them into my facility. My facility is about a 30-minute drive from my home. So it's sometimes hard to get my kids there at a time that I can train them in my facility and get them a workout there. So we purchased some at-home equipment so that I could do some work with them at home. And, basically a bench and a barbell set and things like that. And, what I do with them, at this point, it's inadequate, but because it's complemented by occasionally training at my facility, we work around it. So when they're at home, I'm doing those basic barbell exercises like the bench presses, and I have them do some bent over rows, and I'll have them do some pull-up exercises, body weight chin-ups and things, or I'll have them do push-ups and things of that nature. I don't want to have them do squats because I don't like the idea of the barbell being loaded through the spine on top of your shoulders and that sort of thing. So even though while I might agree that muscle-wise, the barbell squat can be a very productive exercise, I don't think it's a good, safe choice to be loading that weight on your spine like that. And plus, when you have sort of awkward teenagers that don't have the good muscle control that you'd like them to have, and you see some of the form discrepancies that can develop, it's not an exercise that I want to mess with them. So I mainly train their upper body things at home when I'm doing that, and then when they're at my facility, I'll have them do things like obviously the leg curl and the leg press and some of those other type of movements to get at their legs. But more specifically for you, I would certainly, I think from an upper body standpoint, you can much more capably train most of all of your upper body with those conventional type exercises. When you get at the lower body, the only thing you've got with the barbell is say the barbell squats or some deadlifts, but as we just talked about with the barbell squat, it's probably not the best choice. So if I were you, I would try to at least get some sort of rudimentary equipment where maybe you could do some sort of other leg exercises like leg curls or leg extensions or some sort of a leg press to get at that. In lieu of that, sure, you could do, say, the wall squats or the wall sit that I think you mentioned, and you could do some super slow body weight squats. I guess, eventually it depends on what your capabilities become and whether that's adequate resistance enough to fatigue you within sort of the optimal time under load range.
It is at the moment.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like as I get like that skill acquisition part down, it's interesting. I recently read a book called Hill Fit by Chris Highcock. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I've heard his name. Yeah.
Yeah. So and it's he's put this book together, and it's to help people that really enjoy walking. Basically improve their walking performance, but also help them enjoy walking more by building up their bodies and making them stronger. And obviously he's a big advocate of the type of resistance training we're talking about. But he understands that a lot of these people perhaps don't have access to the types of machines we're talking about, and a lot of them will want to work out the comforts of their own home. And I've completely lost my train of thought, but I'm trying to, but it's all bodyweight stuff, like wall sits, super slow. Well, actually super slow squats aren't in there, but wall sits play a big part. And so basically I've started doing the program that's described in that book, with my own modifications to it. But yeah, I guess I'm just concerned that I've got a barbell, so I can do deadlifts. I don't really have the room right now to have any machines or anything like that, or the budget. So I'm just thinking, because I'm thinking, deadlifts performed correctly with good form are probably a good choice for the lower back, in lieu of a lower back machine or something like that. And then maybe for hamstrings, I know in HillFit, Chris talks about hip extensions. But again, they're a very difficult one to perform to failure, so I'm not sure how you get around that. And are you kind of suggesting that there is really no exercise that really targets them that you can think of that really requires very, very little equipment or anything?
Well, like I say, I mean, don't misread the fact that you are getting some benefit to your hamstrings doing the deadlifts, okay? And if you're doing some sort of squat and so forth, you are getting activation of the hamstrings. I just don't believe that it's adequate for any real significant development and strength of that muscle. It being that alone, without doing any sort of leg curl involving knee flexion. Okay, so not to overly dwell on that, but if it was me, I would certainly be trying to find some way. If I didn't have any equipment, I couldn't go to a gym, and then I didn't have any equipment that I could fit in budget-wise or space-wise, what would I do for hamstrings? I would probably try to get a friend and do some manual resistance, where a friend applies resistance. You could lay on your stomach on the floor, and the person could put manually applied resistance against the back of your calf and ankle, and you perform a leg curl against that resistance. Okay. Now that can be an effective exercise, but what it takes is two things: is that a cooperative subject performing the exercise and a somewhat skilled person applying the resistance. Because what you're doing is you're trying to become the machine, or your partner or whatever is trying to become the machine and apply resistance through the range of motion, and having to adjust their pressure relative to the changes in your strength, like a machine would with a cam or something. Yeah. So, there would be points during that performance of that exercise where the person would have to apply more or less resistance to compensate your varying strength as you move through the range of motion. And then there's a matter of getting into the appropriate position to have the appropriate amount of leverage, to apply this resistance. But I would be trying to do that, and through practice and developing the skills between you and a partner, you could have an effective hamstring exercise manually applied like that. This would be a good thing to do for your neck muscles as well, applying manual resistance to both, the cervical or neck flexion and extension exercises. And it's not that hard to learn. It's not hard to do. There's books out there about manual resistance training and, different types of exercises and how to apply the resistance and stuff. And I used to do some of this when, in the earlier days when I didn't have as much different machines as I do now in my facility. So, when I didn't have a neck machine, let's say, I, would apply manual resistance neck exercises with people and so forth. So I would look to, in lieu of having equipment, look to doing some manually applied resistance for certain areas where you can get some of that direct work without the need for a machine.
Okay, well that's good. That I was going to ask you about neck training, because I do miss the 4-way neck machine at Kieser, which is a great piece of equipment. And so I've sort of had a go at doing the manual resistance. I've got to say I do struggle with it, and I've realized that you should definitely do it at least I think at the beginning of a workout, because after I've exhausted myself from doing chin-ups and push-ups, I've got no resistance that I can apply to my head to work against my neck muscles. So that was a learning curve. I was wondering though, I've had a guest on here on the show before who doesn't think that training the neck to failure is perhaps the wisest thing, as they're smaller muscles and the neck's obviously quite a delicate area that you want to make sure you don't injure. It's quite fragile. What are your thoughts on? So, if take manual resistance on the neck, what would the protocol be that you used before you introduced 4-way neck machines or neck machines in your facility?
Yeah. Well, first off, with any type of manual resistance exercise, you don't really have a defined failure, because there's no quantification of the resistance that you're applying, and it's not necessarily the resistance that's being applied is changing relative to your strength, not just the strength changes over the range of motion, but as you're fatiguing, you're having a need to apply less manual resistance, because your muscles are not producing as much force, so there doesn't need to be as much counter force to resist that. So what happens is you don't have that classical train to failure, hit the point where you can't do it anymore. You just keep fatiguing and fatiguing and fatiguing, and it's how long do you want to keep going? You could take somebody to the point where they literally don't have any more strength left to even lift their limbs. Okay. So at some point, what I would just generally do when I apply manual resistance is that I still try to keep the length of the set within sort of that optimal time under load window, which, just to say what that is, sort of physiologically, we would say that a set should maybe be between 45 seconds in length and 90 seconds, let's say, okay? Practically speaking, I keep most clients' time under load somewhere between a minute and a minute 30, okay? I never like to see it get above a minute 30, but absolutely never more than 2 minutes, okay? And those longer sets would maybe be with people that are just learning and so forth. But so generally, let's say we're doing manual resistance, we want to fatigue that person somewhere in, the larger 45 to 90 second window, but more preferentially, let's say a minute to, a minute and a half. So applying that manual resistance, and then you could create a failure. Obviously, if the person applies enough resistance and you've fatigued, and he could stop you from moving at some point, so you're so-called at failure because you can no longer overcome his resistance, but that's kind of arbitrarily defined based on how hard the person applies the resistance against you,
Yeah.
But I would still, what I'm saying is that even though you can't quantify it accurately, I would still try to deeply fatigue the person and bring them to at least a subjective, fairly thorough state of fatigue within 90 seconds. Okay. And whether you want to have that be with the end point being where the person is resisting you so hard that you can't move it any farther, and then you continue to maybe apply a static contraction against their immovable force, that's fine if you want that sensation of failure. But otherwise, just bring it to a deep enough state of fatigue that within that time window, and not just keep going on and on.
And I suppose because I was, when I mean manual resistance, I should have said I'm actually applying it to myself with my own hands. So the same principle applies there, right?
Yeah, so you would, so now you're the application and the subject at the same time, So as you're applying that resistance to yourself, obviously you're trying to apply it enough that it's giving you adequate work as you're trying to overcome that resistance, and you're sensing the fatigue that you're experiencing as you go. And obviously, as you're becoming fatigued, you're not having to apply as much resistance because your muscles are putting out less. And you bring yourself to the point where you subjectively feel fatigued enough within that time window that you feel you've gotten a thorough workout on that muscle group. And like I said, you could, as you get near that stage, if you want to apply enough resistance to yourself to stop your head from moving and then continue to exert force against that immovable resistance and sort of have that failure occur, that will certainly enhance the fatigue level, the inroad level, or whatever. But you just have to sort of subjectively balance your application of resistance against your perceived level of fatigue, and I guess determine for yourself if you feel adequately worked in that area.
Okay. Good stuff. All right, let's have a look at this. Yeah, in terms of your clients, so I guess changing subject slightly, but in terms of your facility and the clients you train, you mentioned on the website that you have clients I don't know typically, but some of them train twice a week. How many of your clients, because I assume you've collected some pretty interesting data from all of the clients you have and all the people you've trained over the years. How many of your clients train twice a week? And do you spread out workouts further apart as they get stronger for recovery?
Yeah, we do. Kind of our general approach for most people is we recommend twice a week. All right, and keep in mind that when you're talking about these recommendations for how frequently one should train and how much recovery is needed, it's easy to sort of get confused because you've got a situation where if you're talking to other very, let's say, advanced trainees or people that are really experienced with exercise and really skilled at exercise, and they're willing to push themselves to the limit and train to failure, and they're not sort of dissuaded or impeded by discomfort of muscle ache and burn and elevated heart rate and stuff. In other words, they've got a high tolerance for putting up with the discomfort of exercise, and they've got a high motivation level and high skill level, and they're really training hard and pushing to deep levels of fatigue and hitting, a legitimate failure. That's different than somebody, say, the average person walking in off the street, middle-aged person with not a lot of experience with exercise, not a very good fitness level, not a very good sort of pain tolerance or motivation level and things like that. So, it's easy to spend time on the internet discussion boards and chat rooms and some of the high-intensity sites where people talk about training once a week or once every 10 days and, these longer drawn out recovery periods that they feel they need. But that's not really applicable to most of the people that I would be dealing with because the universal problem with the average client is that they're unwilling to work hard. They're unwilling to, seriously, they're unwilling to tolerate the discomfort. They're not real well motivated. They're not very skilled in the exercise. And I would say either it's difficult to get them to a true muscle failure, because what you're dealing with is, just like I described earlier with some of the bodybuilders, where in their minds they're at failure and they're quitting the exercise, but by my trained eye, I know they weren't really anywhere near failure, okay, because they didn't exhibit any of the signs and symptoms or criteria of what a true failure would be. So you have the same type of thing with clients, is that their perception of how hard they're working is really distorted. They think that they're being crucified and that they can't take anymore, and they're so discomfort and there's so muscle burns going on that they think they're done and can't do anymore when they may have 5 reps left in them, So you've got people that, for the most part, aren't really truly getting to muscle failure, okay? So the notion that one of those people should only train once a week with 3 to 5 exercises and, then take an extended recovery period, it's just not applicable, okay? So with the people that I'm dealing with, we recommend twice a week, and we try to get them to work, obviously as hard as we can, but due to those built-in limitations, I would say most people are not really working at the level that I would like to see. But that's being counterbalanced by the fact that, okay, because of that, they don't need as long of a recovery, and they can come back 3 days later and train again. Got it. Right. And the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these people, they need to be in that fitness mindset, I call it. In other words, if the only thing they do is come into my facility once a week, and that's the only time they think about their fitness or their health or anything, and then the rest of the time they're just off doing their thing, that's detrimental because they're not necessarily keeping up with their diet, they're not keeping up with other lifestyle things. So having them be in the facility twice a week and have more of that connection to us and to their trainer, and more opportunity to keep them focused on their diet and their lifestyle issues and check in with them and those types of things, it helps. But, so in terms of how many people, even though we recommend twice a week as a general rule, not all of our clients train twice a week. Many of them do train once a week, and a lot of the times that's a financial consideration, that they just can't afford to have a trainer twice a week, or they travel with their business or their job to the point where they can't be in the facility twice a week. Okay, so I would say maybe right now 60 to 65% of our clients are training twice a week, and the others are training once a week.
Right. Okay. Cool. talking about, obviously there's this high intensity training community with some real characters in it, and some people are are incredibly ironically dogmatic about kind of the high intensity training certain principles. I think our knowledge of exercise is always evolving, and it's so important to always keep an open mind, and question what you're doing in general. So I'd be interested, what views do you have that perhaps the opposite or different to a lot of the people in the high intensity training community, I guess, in terms of maybe something you disagree with or something that you do differently when you train your clients or yourself? Is there anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, there's some things, and one of the things that I'll just say generally, since we've already kind of touched upon the subject, is that I think what's happened within the high intensity community, and particularly it kind of started with probably originally with some of Mike Mentzer's books and training and recommending sort of lower volume consolidated type of programs with sort of lengthy recovery periods, and then obviously continuing with Doug McGuff's Body by Science and the Big Five, and then cutting back to the Big Three, and initially training once a week and then maybe going out to once every 10 days, and some people only training once every 2 weeks and things like that. And it seems what's happened in some circles is that sort of it's become so ultra brief and so ultra low volume and such a lengthy recovery period between sessions that I think it's sort of jumped off the rails a little bit and become sort of too low a volume or too infrequent of training. Okay, and some of what's facilitated this is that people completely base their progress on whether or not their training weight loads are going up. In other words, the weights you're using on your lifts for each of your sets, is your training load increasing over time? And if it's going up, you can rest assured that you're getting stronger and that progress is being made. So, what this tends to lead to is that if you're training once every 5 days and you seem to hit a plateau on your training load, then that means you're not recovered, so you need a little more recovery. So then you go to once every 7 days, and if you plateau at that, then you go to once every 10 days, and you keep extending it out, thinking that if you're plateaued, it must mean you're overtrained and you're not recovered or something, okay? Or even vice versa. People are led to believe that if your training loads are going up, then you, in fact, are making progress and getting stronger. Okay, but the problem is that training weight load that you're using in your performance on a given day, there's a lot of variables that influence that. And there's a lot of skill involved. There's a lot of motivation factors, pain tolerance factors, little different discrepancies with your form or technique that could enable, more reps or a longer time under load. I don't have it all in front of me, but I have a list. In fact, I did a lecture one time about this, that there's like 12 different factors that can influence your performance on a set of an exercise.
Interesting.
Okay, and only one of those is your strength. Okay, so what I'm saying is, just because your training weight loads are increasing over time is not a guarantee that you're getting stronger or that you're building muscle mass. And I've seen enough people time after time over the years where they have a period of enormous increases in their training weight load over time, but show absolutely no evidence of any muscle being built or any changes in their physique. Okay, I've seen people, say on the Med-X leg press, go from performing 400 pounds to failure in 90 seconds to a year later performing 800 pounds in 90 seconds, but their legs showing no signs whatsoever of an ounce of muscle being built, So consequently, people can get sort of distorted views on whether they're progressing or whether they're plateaued and whether they need less exercise or more recovery and different things. And I think that, combined with the fact that there seems to be bragging rights gained by how little you need to train. It's like if you watch the TV interviews with like actors who have trained for roles where they had to do some physical training and build their bodies up for the role. Oftentimes they'll go on these talk shows and they'll describe the enormous amounts of training that they had to do. They had to train 7 days a week and 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening, and they had this trainer that made them do this and that and all this enormous amounts of training and this regimented diet, and they were just put through this incredible program for 6 months to train for this role, and they try to wow everybody with the enormous amounts of exercise and strict discipline that they had to do for the role. Well, it seems like with high-intensity people these days, that bragging rights comes by trying to brag at how little you can tolerate training. Like if you can only tolerate 3 exercises once every 2 weeks and anything more is overtraining, that appears to be bragging rights because you're so advanced and you're so strong and you train so deeply and inroad so deeply that you can only handle 3 exercises and you have to then take 2 weeks off. So that's where I say it seems to have jumped the rails, where now people are going too extreme in how little exercise they think they need, and perhaps they're, not that they're not getting any benefit from that, but I would suggest that it's probably not the optimal for building their best possible physique or, muscle level.
Good answer. Cool. Yeah. Right. So another question within that sort of sphere is I've had another guest on who no longer seems to see very much value in working out to momentary muscular failure, and that is down to a couple of things. One being they don't like this person in particular works out quite frequently, and they don't like the workout being something they dread. Which in the high intensity training space is completely understandable. Although some people like the dread, if you get my drift. And also, and this is again questionable, but the risks on safety, training to failure, I suppose. Yeah, if you're doing maybe a free weight exercise and your form can obviously worsen over the course of a set. And, if you're training to failure, maybe there's a higher risk of injury. But what are your thoughts on people that don't train to failure and I suppose increase the volume? I mean, I know you said earlier you have clients who you don't think really go to failure. Are these people going to get subpar results? Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess first to address the first point, I don't think training to failure in it of itself is unsafe, and nor would it cause an injury. The act of failure cause an injury. No. Obviously, the first thing, like you mentioned with free weights, there might be some practical aspects where if you're training with free weights, and particularly if you're training yourself without a partner, you may not be able to safely train to failure because the bar will come crashing down on you, or you may lose control of the barbell, or something like that. But that aside, just the act of reaching muscle failure is not at all injurious, and I think more so what happens is people's behavior changes as they get near failure. So as they start to get to failure, they start to panic and they start to get desperate and they start to get focused on trying to complete the rep at all costs. So they may start to squirm or twist or arch or try to jerk the weight or try to lunge into it, or do various different behaviors that are designed to enable them to complete the rep. Okay, but that could injure you. but that's not the fault of training to failure. That's the fault of your misbehavior. Okay.
Yes. It's important to identify that. I understand why you've explained that.
Yeah. So obviously, as far as the dreading it part, yeah, I mean, the harder you push yourself and the more deeply you fatigue yourself, the more muscle burn and ache you're going to create. And, some people may find that not pleasant and dreadful. But, personally, I've never been bothered by that. I've never been deterred. That doesn't bother me. I can pretty much endure any type of discomfort, and it doesn't, number one, cause bad behavior when I'm training, and it doesn't cause me to dread it. One aspect that I would say related to this, there's a difference between training to failure and then once failure is recognized, simply ceasing the exercises, versus training to failure and then continuing to push and push and push against failure or against that immovable object for an extended period of time. There's in the super slow guidelines in the materials, it talks about the thorough inroad technique. And that sort of in a nutshell is training way beyond failure. Okay, so you train to muscle failure, but then at that point, in effect, you're just now beginning the exercise, because after failure occurs, you continue to exert maximal force against the unmoving weight for 15 seconds. Then you would come down and attempt the next rep and get as far into the next rep as you can, and then again push for 10 to 15 seconds against the immovable object, and then down and keep doing that until you literally can't move the weight in any position. Okay, so you may spend 30 or 45 seconds after failure continuing to push and exert and fatigue and your muscles and so forth. So that's, I can see, being very dreadful and hard to tolerate, but also being something that requires a lengthy recovery from that, because you're really talking about pushing to a deep devastation that is not going to be recovered from in a couple of days. Okay, but I would counter that I don't think that thorough inroad technique adds one whit of benefit to the exercise, or one bit of stimulation that's productive. I think it's a waste of time, and it just completely needlessly extends your need for recovery. Okay, but simply training to failure where you can't, the weight stops and you can't complete the rep, and then after that you set the weight down. I think that's effective, and particularly if you're only doing one set, it's pretty necessary to do. Because you've just got your one shot at it, and you need to ensure that you've kind of adequately stimulated that muscle. But with that said, there's no doubt that training to failure is not required to get strength gains, because there's millions of people all over the world that never train to failure and they still get strength gains. Okay, now granted, many of those people are doing multiple sets. So what I would say is if you're not going to train to failure, the first question becomes, well, how close to failure are you going to train? Are you a skilled person like I myself, I can pretty much know when failure is going to come, in terms of, as I complete a rep, I may have a rep that I just barely complete. Like it just takes, all my effort and I barely complete the full rep. And then I'm coming down with that weight, and I know, the negative's almost starting to run away with you. And there's no way that next rep is going anywhere. Okay, and you've had this experience enough time, so I could theoretically stop after that last complete rep that I got, and then not even bother with that rep that I'm certain I'm not going to get. Okay, now this is only applicable to a really advanced subject that is not giving in to the subjective feelings of muscle burn and somebody that's motivated. So somebody that's really being honest and is skilled and experienced, okay, you could stop on that last complete rep that you can get and not bother with that half a rep that you're going to get stuck at. Okay, and I think that would be adequate. But I wouldn't apply that with either unskilled subjects or the average client, because their last rep is not really their last rep. It's just the last rep they want to do, not necessarily last rep that they could do. So I would say if somebody is not training to failure, or let's say they were trying to keep the discomfort level down to the point that they were stopping a couple reps short of failure, just to avoid the exercise becoming dreadful, then I would say that person would not be receiving maximal benefit from the exercise, and perhaps they would be required to do multiple sets of the same exercise in order to sort of accumulate more fatigue to get a better stimulus.
Okay. So on that vein, what kind of workout protocol, and I'd love to hear the details of this, like rest periods, specific exercises. What kind of workout protocol do you recommend to someone who comes to your facility and says, okay, Tim, I want to build the biggest muscles I possibly can. Like, obviously there's genetic limitations to that in most people, but what do you say, and what sort of workout do you put them through?
Yeah. Okay. So first off, let's just put the genetic things aside and not even consider that. So just in general, what would I do? Obviously, the first thing it would depend on how experienced this person is. Are they currently training? Are they have they been weightlifting for a while or something? How old are they? Those kind of things. If it was somebody that is relatively, not currently training, not in real good condition, maybe doesn't have a whole lot of experience with it, I would at least initially start them on the typical approach of twice a week. I would generally have them do maybe 8 to 10 different machines in each of their workouts, and I would take them through and do one set and as close to failure as possible, and with the proper form and technique. So they'd be training twice a week, 8 to 10 exercises, full body workouts, so that means that of those 8 to 10 exercises, there might be 3 things for their lower body and 5 things for their upper body, and then, a low back or a abdominal exercise or some neck exercises to kind of round it out. But then let's say once that person progresses and has done that kind of a program for a while, and let's say they really want to start maximizing, their physique development and their muscle growth and stuff like that. Or let's say somebody more advanced comes in and starts this way, I would actually, for the most part, recommend that they do some split body part routines, not necessarily a full body workout every time. And in this case, it might involve 3 workouts in a week, but it wouldn't be, 3 workouts training the same muscles every time. Okay. It may be something like, let's say Monday is a lower body workout only, and then Wednesday is an upper body workout only, and then maybe Friday is back to another lower body workout, and kind of alternating through like that. Okay. But doing those split routines would enable, you could still do just one set of each exercise, but it would enable you to do more exercises for each of the muscle groups. So, in the case of, let's say, training your lower body, you may be doing the leg press exercise and the leg extension exercise and the leg curl and maybe a hip extension exercise and some, inner thigh adductor things and the calves and those kind of things. So it's allowing you to train with more exercises and more volume for the muscle groups, but you're still training with one set. And then, of course, when you get into the upper body, you're able to maybe do 2 things for your chest and 2 things for your upper back and 2 things for your shoulders, and then some direct arm work and things like that. So again, you're doing a higher volume of exercise for those muscles, even though you're still adhering to the one set kind of principle. And what this allows is, I think 2 things happen, is the added volume and the added stress and stimulation by doing those exercises is beneficial, but there seems to be better recovery when you're only training half the body rather than the full body. Okay. And and I'm going to make an exception to this in a minute, but generally, if somebody's trying to come in and do 8 to 10 exercises and they're training the full body, that means they're essentially training a lot of muscle groups all over their body. And, even though we could say, well, there's 600 muscles in the body and you're not necessarily, doing an exercise for every one of those, but generally you're training your full body, your chest, your shoulders, your back, your biceps, your triceps, your abdominals, your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves. You're getting all of these muscles that have been fatigued and stimulated. And now all of those muscles have to be rebuilt and recover and adapted before you train the next time, okay? Versus if you do, let's say, a lower body workout only, you only have those lower body muscles that have been stressed and fatigued and broken down and need to recover. So I would say it's easier to recover from that lower body only workout than it would be to recover from a full body workout. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what it enables is that you can get a little higher volume without the need for lengthier recoveries that you would have with the full body workouts. So what happens with the full body workouts, and particularly, and this is where obviously some of this stuff is gone, is that when you're training all of those muscle groups and you're trying to address all of the muscle groups in one session by using 8 to 10 different exercises or something, that gets harder and harder to tolerate as you become more advanced and as you more deeply fatigue yourself, and it makes for a longer recovery process over time. So then that results in you having to scale back the volume, do fewer exercises, and allow lengthier recovery time. But then, so that becomes necessary to tolerate that and to recover from it. But because now you're cutting back the volume and the frequency, my question would be, what are you doing to the effectiveness of the training? Doing something to tolerate it versus doing something that's optimal, okay? So the split routines allow you to keep the volume up and do more work and still recover from it and not have to train so infrequently. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's, I guess, do you provide dietary advice to these clients or to clients in general?
Yeah, we definitely do, because almost everybody that walks through the doors, one of their motivating factors for bringing them to us is that they want to lose weight. Mm-hmm. Right? They're over fat. And unfortunately, people have it stuck in their head that if you need to lose fat, you need to exercise. And it's good that it brings them through our door, but what the issue is that they mistakenly believe that the exercise they're doing causes them to lose weight. Okay? And the problem is, it's not the exercise that causes the weight loss, it's the diet. All right? So, they're expecting the exercise to do it, and they're expecting to not have to change their diet, and they can just go about their business and exercise, and now this magical exercise is going to cause them to shed the fat. So the first thing we have to do is sort of disabuse them of that misconception and explain to them that you're half right. The exercise is critically important to the process, but not for the reason you think. The importance of exercise is that it preserves and protects your lean muscle tissue while you're losing the fat. So more specifically, it promotes discriminate weight loss, where rather than just lose body weight from all your tissues, your fat, your muscles, your organs, and water and everything else, by exercise and doing the strength training, it stimulates your muscles to be preserved so that the weight you do lose is the fat weight and not the muscle weight. Mm-hmm. All right. But the actual stimulus for the fat loss comes through your diet. All right. And obviously there's a lot of debate and discussion with that. Is it the caloric control and limiting your calories that causes you to lose the weight, or is it more related to controlling the carbohydrate intake and keeping your insulin levels low and, that type of thing. So you've got the low carb and the paleo and, the protein power type of diet approaches, the Atkins, that are promoting the real low, carbohydrate type of thing. Or, Ellington Darden, he believes that's all a bunch of nonsense and it's all about the calorie control, So Darden will work with people on low calorie diets. So what I try to do with the dietary control is, as I said, first off, get them to understand that the fat loss is almost entirely a result of your diet, not your exercise. And then in terms of how they're eating, I teach them to focus. I don't have them count calories. I don't have them even focus on limiting calories. I have them focus on eating the appropriate foods and primarily teaching them to eat what you could describe in various ways, but a whole food diet, meaning that you want to focus on choosing whole foods that are not processed and manufactured and man-made and created in a food manufacturer place. So if you think about this, whole foods would be considered any foods that you could theoretically hunt or fish or pick or gather. Okay. Another way of looking at it is whole foods are anything that you could obtain from nature by going out. You could kill animals and eat the meat. You could catch fish and eat them. You could take eggs and eat them. You could gather up nuts and berries and pick fruits and vegetables and things. These are the whole foods. So you want to eat those type of foods, and you stay away from all the processed, refined, manufactured type of foods and the fake foods and things that food manufacturers are created. And if you think about it, if you just focus on eating those whole foods, you generally are going to be carbohydrate controlled just by doing that, and you're going to keep your insulin levels low, and you're going to be eating much more adequate levels of protein and healthy fats and things like that. So by eating in that way, it automatically controls probably both the calories and the carbohydrate levels to a large degree. Some people may squabble about how much fruit you should eat, but if somebody had a problem with that, they could eat less. But if you think about it, if you're eating meat and fish and eggs and nuts and berries and lots of vegetables, you're not eating anything bad, and you're not eating anything that has very high carbohydrates or that's going to really drive your insulin levels up and cause a bunch of problems. And I find that people that do that, they naturally eat in a much more satisfying way, and their appetite control mechanism is functioning much better, and you find yourself not being as hungry all the time, not needing to eat as frequently, being more satisfied by your meals. And you don't have to get all fixated on trying to, weigh and portion food and count calories in every little morsel that you put in your mouth.
Yeah, I completely agree. How do you, what kind of dietary advice do you give to the young guy or girl, although girl I would think would be unlikely to ask this, but the young guy that comes in and wants to build a lot of muscle mass beyond what he can probably achieve, but what sort of dietary advice do you give them? I mean, you've got people like Tim Ferriss, who's quite famous for talking about overfeeding in the 4-hour body, but then you've got Doug who says does it really make a difference if you're getting enough calories, if you're getting a sufficient amount? There's some researcher support. I think it's not on humans, but on mice, where they actually, and you probably know this very well, where they starve the mice, but they still were able to build muscle in a calorie deficit environment. Don't think that's been done for humans. It's probably quite difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But Doug's basically saying, look, increase your calories by, last time I spoke to him, sort of 100 to 200 calories per day, like really small amounts. So what's your take on the dietary requirements that supplement muscle gain, and what do you normally advise those types of people?
Yeah, first off, the general advice would still be the same as I told you, eating those whole foods and focusing on those choices. I would put more emphasis on making sure the person was really getting higher levels of protein, generally trying to get them to try to eat 1 gram of protein for every pound of body weight. Okay. And make sure that they're getting that level of protein, and that's obviously going to probably have to be done in more than, let's say, 3 meals, probably 3 meals and then a couple snacks. I would typically probably have them have some of that protein be in supplementation, some sort of a protein drink, because it's just practicality standpoint, it's harder to get enough meals in and with scheduling and stuff. So having a protein drink in between meals or something would be helpful. But I would focus on having them eat the whole foods, getting that amount of protein in, making sure they're getting plenty of healthy fats, and eating in a way where they're satisfied and not not overindulging and feeling full or, overgorging themselves, but being satisfied and not feeling limited, so probably practically it'd be more like what Doug said, that, if you're 100 or 200 calories over and you're getting, good food choices and you're getting your protein and everything, that's probably fine. I wouldn't necessarily get into this overfeeding and all of that kind of thing, because you probably do, for optimally building muscle, you probably don't want to be in a sustained calorie deficit all the time, but you also don't want to be so overindulged that you're gaining a lot of fat in the process either. Because then you build the muscle and then you have to spend so much time taking the fat off that you end up losing some muscle back in the process. So being more, as Doug would say, just a little bit maybe over in calories, but not a high level where you're gaining a lot of fat in the process.
I always thought, there's obviously a lot of different views on protein intake. Some people say gram per pound. Other people say a gram per, or the variation of that per kilogram or something like that. I weigh probably, I'm quite light right now. I'm probably only like 165 right now, lean. Maybe a bit more than that, I don't know, 170. And I always think, geez, that's a lot of protein, Yeah. And I'm not sure I'm convinced it's necessary. So what makes you think that, you really need that much? I mean, there's people far bigger than me, but do you really need, 180, 200 grams of protein every single day?
Yeah.
To support muscle growth?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there could be some debate around that. One thing for certain, the government recommendations that list, sort of the recommended daily allowance of protein for people, there's enough research indicating that that's just the bare minimum that somebody should have. And most of those levels are determined based on what's the minimum level you need to avoid some sort of deficiency disorder. Okay.
All right. Well, what is that recommendation? Do you remember? I don't know.
I probably don't know it off the top of my head, but I would say for, let's say somebody that your weight that you just described, they would maybe tell you 80 grams a day or something like that. Okay. I mean, it would be something definitely below 100 grams. And I think it would more be probably in the 80 or 90 grams a day that they'd be telling you. But that would be like the bare minimum. And there has been research indicating that people that are athletes or extremely active or bodybuilders and things of that nature definitely need more more protein than the recommended allowance. And even, the conventional guidelines would bring that up over 100 probably. But then when you look at sort of what people that are really into the training and the bodybuilding and the muscle building stuff, most of those people will present these higher levels more like I mentioned to you, gram per pound or whatever. And I've got part of this comes from discussions with other trainers and friends of mine and people that they've experimented with during the years. I know a guy near my area that he says he notices a distinct difference in the quality of people's results and their strength gains and muscle building gains when they increase their protein up to like a gram per pound. He says that if he's got clients that are maybe they're only having a half of that or 3/4 of that. So let's say for yourself, if it's a gram each and you're supposed to be having 170 grams of protein a day and you're only eating 110, he's saying that he's seen if you're plateaued and you don't seem to be making much progress and you're eating 110, if you increase that up closer to 160, 170, he said he's consistently seen people get much better results at those higher levels of protein, So, obviously some of this stuff is subjective. There's not a research study to prove every little thing that somebody could recommend, but it's more of a collection of research and recommendations and, practical experience for people that, have studied this and have experience with it and so forth. Cool. But that level is hard to get if you're just doing it strictly with food, because what I try to do personally when I eat is I'm going to try to get 30 or probably about 40 grams of protein per meal. Okay. So if I have 3 meals a day and I get 40 grams at each, that's 120 grams. But then I'll have a protein shake somewhere in there as an in-between meal drink.
Do you care about the quality of the protein shake? Is it grass-fed, or be interested to know the specifics?
Yeah, I mean, I care about it, but maybe not as much to insist that it's grass-fed. But, I definitely get protein mixes that don't have, a lot of the, negative ingredients in there and additives and sweeteners and that kind of stuff. I try to get it as clean as possible, and I definitely don't like soy-based proteins and that kind of stuff. So I'll make sure it's pretty clean as possible, but I'm not necessarily demanding that it's organic or grass-fed sources or something like that.
Which brand do you use?
Well, right now I'm using I'm taking a beef protein. I think it's called Carnivore. I don't know if it's something you have over there. And that's kind of the name. I forget the name of the company.
No worries.
But it's a beef-based protein, and I did that because I do have some whey-based too, but I try to. I don't want to have just constantly whey all the time. So I actually, occasionally have a whey protein shake, but more often I have the beef protein shake because, it's easier to get whey if you're having dairy products or other things, or a lot of times if you have a protein bar or something, it's whey-based and things like that. So I try to offset that by not having too much whey. But anyway, if you think about it, 3 meals and you're getting close to 40 grams a meal, and then you have a 40-gram protein shake, you're already up to 160 without really over-consuming and feeling gorged or something. Yeah. So it obviously takes some thought, because if you don't kind of plan it out and get good protein sources at each meal, or you skip a meal or something, then it's going to be pretty hard to make up that protein and get up those levels. But if you're eating well and not skipping meals and stuff, it's not as hard to get up there as you might think.
Okay, cool. Just aware of time, so I'm going to have to kind of be quite picky about the questions, because you gave some really good long answers. So that's what happens. The best interviews, I generally only ask like 5 questions. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at this. This is a kind of a random question, but you've obviously been in this industry for a very long time, and I know you're kind of the founder of the business. Do you still get involved in the training day to day, like training clients? Is that still a big part of what you do, or are you more behind the scenes, or?
A little both. I try to, there is the burnout factor that the longer you've done this, you start to get to the point that you don't want to do too many sessions, in a day or something.
Exactly my point. It's like, to be frank, do you ever get bored doing this stuff?
Yeah, I can, and certainly, I try to. I try to balance my schedule because I have two problems. One is you can get kind of, as I say, kind of burnt out doing too many sessions. But I find myself, because I'm also sort of the manager of my facility and I run my business and I do my own bookkeeping and accounting work and I have to manage employees and stuff like that. I find myself that if I'm doing too much training of clients, and then I'm feeling stressed of having to also do that other stuff, and I'm thinking about all this stuff that I have to do, and it makes it more difficult to train the clients. So I train clients 4 days a week, and I generally will train maybe 8 to 10 clients per day at the most. So I'm usually doing about 30 to 40 clients a week, each 30-minute sessions. And, I can generally tolerate that and balance that with the other stuff I have to do, but I would not want to do any more than that. Although I have friends that do 100 sessions a week, and they've just got the personalities and they love it and they just get in there and they just bam, 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 one client after the next, a day in and day out, and they love it. And, maybe some personalities and they're fine with that, but I find myself needing a balance between, sort of administrative duties and training clients and not overdoing either one.
Okay. Would you ever consider, one of the listeners actually asked me to ask you this, would you ever consider going into, because they said you have very impressive gym equipment, and you said it's very fine-tuned, and that you've obviously, as you alluded to earlier, you're fascinated by these types of machines, and you've obviously learned a lot about them and learned how you can calibrate them differently. So would you ever consider going into equipment design?
Well, that's something that I would love to do. We haven't had a lot of time to talk about it, but I've done quite a bit of modification of machines and making retrofits, modifications and changes to machines and improving and upgrading my machines and sort of customizing them. And, over the years, I've done that too for quite a lot of other individuals and sort of had a side business where I've refurbished and reconditioned and modified and retrofitted many other people's equipment for them. And, as I said, did that as sort of a side business. And I've certainly always had, an interest, and I thought, it would be a love of mine to be able to actually create entire machines. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a mechanical engineer. I'm not trained in the use of sophisticated computer programs and, designing machines in that way. But if I worked alongside somebody who was a mechanical engineer and I directed what I wanted and how the machine should be designed and what its requirements should be and what its features should be and, all of that, working in hand with an engineer like that, we could create the machines. Because one thing that you have, engineers are highly trained in the mechanical aspects of designing things, and they know the physics and the mechanics and coming up with solutions to how things work. But most engineers have no understanding of exercise and the requirements of exercise, and they don't have the understanding of anatomy and biomechanics and all that kind of stuff. Sure. So oftentimes the machines that are created are not very well designed in terms of what the requirements of exercise are and matching the human body and so forth. So my expertise would be knowing how the machines should be and what those requirements are and how to best match those, biomechanics and so forth and create the right outcome, and then working with that engineer to create that mechanically in the most efficient way and so forth. I would love to do that. And at times I've worked with some engineers and some machinists and things that could build this stuff. And we talked about prototyping it, but the problem is it's an extremely expensive endeavor. To sort of build these things initially, you have to prototype things and create sort of one-off machines that that you're not talking that you have a factory and an assembly line, and you're not buying all this stuff in bulk, and you're not all set up to manufacture. So you're kind of custom making machines one by one and prototyping them. And I was told you could easily spend $10,000 or $20,000 building a prototype of a machine, and then if it's not right and you got to make modifications and do it some more and make changes to it, you could quite easily spend quite a lot of money doing this. And the problem is the type of equipment that I'd like to buy, not buy, manufacture, it wouldn't be stuff that would be cost effective for the average gym. There wouldn't be a big market for it, because I would want to do stuff that's highly sophisticated and requires a knowledgeable, trained exercise instructor who knows how to operate the equipment. This wouldn't be stuff for throwing in the average gym and letting people self-serve use it. So consequently, you'd have machines that are going to be sophisticated enough and expensive enough that there's not going to be a huge market for them of people buying them. So ultimately it gets down to the point that you just don't have the funds and the capital to make it, and there's probably not a high enough return on your investment to make it worthwhile. So unless I was independently wealthy and I was just doing it for myself and anybody else who wanted it, and I didn't need to do it to make a profit, then it might be fun to do. Yeah.
Sounds good. Cool. Okay, now that's a good answer. I appreciate the barriers to entry, so to speak, in that type of business. What we need is some billionaires who love high intensity training, which I don't know very many, to really get behind something like that. It'd be quite awesome. I've got some rapid fire questions for you, although the answers don't have to be rapid fire. They're just kind of short questions. What book on exercise do you gift the most to friends or colleagues or even trainees, clients?
Yeah. Well, I would say probably most of the times when I give out books to other trainers that are wanting to learn about this style of exercise. Mm-hmm. So one of the, I guess, the initial or first books that I give out is Ellington Darden's Nautilus book. Because I feel that's the best one that sort of at least sets the stage for the concepts and the philosophy, and gives the background information, about where a lot of these concepts came from, and gives all the basic principles. And it's also a book that's easy to read and understand, as the first book. So I'll start with that, and then as we get more into it, another good book along the same lines is that Werner Kieser wrote a book called Full Strength.
Familiar with that, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes I give that out, and it's real similar to just giving the basic overview and the general principles. But then as we move on, I'll get into giving out, say, the Super Slow book by Ken Hutchins, and the Body by Science by Doug McGuff, and those type of books, to start to get more involved in some of the more up to date and finer points of the the philosophy and the training.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What have you changed your mind about in the last year in the health and fitness realm?
Well, I would say one of the things I mentioned earlier is I have a much greater appreciation for focusing on the compound movements and doing things like chin-ups and dips and chest press and compound row and leg press as those mainstays, where in the past I used to be more heavily involved in doing, not that I ever neglected those, but I also used a lot more kind of isolated rotary type exercises. And now I find myself about 75% of the time focusing on those bigger compound movements, and then the other 25% doing the rotary movements, just to, keep adequate training on them and keep adequate development on some of those other muscle groups. That would be one thing. And then the other thing being that, like we had talked about with the volume of the training, that I think that just as you can overtrain and do too much or do more than you need, you can also undertrain and not be doing enough or not training as frequently. And I think we got to come back somewhere to the middle and make sure that we're adequately training.
Okay. Who are your biggest mentors in this space? If you have mentors or...
Yeah. Well, I would say over the years, the people that have most influenced me is obviously number one, Arthur Jones. He's probably the biggest reason why I got into this business and, most influenced me over the years. Obviously Ellington Darden provided a lot of insight with his materials. For a time, Ken Hutchins, I was involved with for a while, although I no longer am really involved with him, but he obviously had a lot of influence on me. And I would say those three people, and then just all my other friends and colleagues and people over the years, a guy named Rob Sereno, who is an instructor in Washington, D.C. area, and Robert Francis, trainer in New York area. And I've been kind of closest to those two and sharing information and that type of thing.
Cool. Well, Tim, look, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. What's the best way for people to find out more about you and contact you?
Yeah, I would say the best way is they can go to the website, precisionfitnessinc.com, and all my contact information is there, and obviously a little bit about my facility, but they could contact me through email, through the website, or contact me at my business phone number, and those would be the two best ways.
Cool. Yeah, I noticed that if you put Precision Fitness in Google, tons of people have stolen your company name.
Yeah.
Because obviously you were there first,
Yeah, right. And unfortunately, I think in the state of Illinois, where I live in the United States, I've got that name secured for that, but it's not a national thing. So other people in other states can also be called Precision Fitness. So you have to find the right one. So it's precisionfitnessinc.com.
Good stuff. Okay. And for all of the show notes and links, things that we've mentioned in this podcast, go over to corpwarrior.com, CORP warrior.com, and it will be there. But if it isn't, just type Tim Ryan in the search box and it will send you, well, it'll bring up the correct blog post. Cool. All right, Tim. Well, thanks a lot again for your time. Really appreciate it. It's really good to get you on. And enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be in touch as soon as this is live. This episode is brought to you by hituni.com. If you haven't been a long-time listener and had the upsides of high-intensity training drilled into your brain, HIT has dramatically reduced my exercise volume to sub 30 minutes per week, while helping me build more muscle and reduce my body fat to 10%, which in turn has enabled me to do more with my time, like play sports that I love, build businesses, and play more Call of Duty. Who wouldn't want that? So what has this got to do with HIT Uni? HitUni.com are providers of amazing online courses that teach you all about high-intensity training. There's a course for newbies that will show you how to optimize your workouts to build more muscle, burn more fat, and improve overall health. And the bulk of the courses are designed to qualify you to become a high-intensity training personal trainer and equip you with all the knowledge and business skills you need to build a successful fitness business. HIT Uni comes highly recommended by Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, Drew Bay, and Medx Precision Fitness owner Blair Wilson. It was founded by author and one of the UK's leading personal trainers, Simon Shawcross, who's been training people for 15 years and has supervised over 15,000 workouts. With help from contributors like Jimmy Moore, Dr. James Steele, and Edward Harrison, and inspiration from Arthur Jones, Dr. Ellington Darden, Ken Hutchins, Mike Mensa, HIT Uni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's an online support and discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. I personally used HIT Uni to build my own stunning physique, just kidding, but I have purchased a course to improve my understanding of HIT and improve my own results. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into these bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement as you tick off each one. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, choose your course, and enter the coupon code CW10. Thank you for your support.